Having completed the rear end of our EB48 2.1 buggy, it's time to move our attention across to the front end with Bag G, Front End Assembly. Bag G contains all the parts required to start off our front end assembly, so the arms and the sway bar, which is 2.3mm up front. Notice how the arms have some curvature built into them, which helps with the caster as there is less need to build it into the caster block itself, keeping it stronger. Anyways, we'll start with the B block, where we need to install our hinge pin inserts, the stock being the single center dot inserts which fit nicely into the block, and can then be installed to the rear of the front gearbox using two 14mm button head screws. Moving across to our first arm now, where we insert the 10mm droop screw on the inner center, followed by a hinge pin bushing on either side, allowing the hinge pin to now fall into place. Repeat with the second arm, so 10mm droop screw, hinge pin bushings, and hinge pin. We can now seat these into position into the B block hinge inserts we just installed. Moving on to the A block, insert the hinge pin inserts to either side, stock position being a single upper dot, and then push it into place, taking care to capture the hinge pins while doing so. Cover with the front bumper, before securing in place with a single 14mm button head screw. There's no need to over tighten this, as we'll be loosening it back out when we come to installing the front end to the chassis anyway. So that's our front arms installed and moving nice and freely. We can now concentrate on installation of the sway bar. Just like the rear, start by inserting the two bearings into the front of the gearbox this time, before feeding the sway bar through, and then insert a sway bar screw mount onto either end and down towards the bearing, with the collar end facing towards the bearing of course. Followed by inserting set screws into both, which we don't tighten down just yet as we may need some movement before tightening everything down into place. Onto our sway bar linkages, insert a pivot ball onto either end, one with just a ball, and one end has a small collar. Again, the Tekno shock tool comes in especially handy here. Repeat with the second linkage arm too. Insert one end of the sway bar into the pivot ball with the collar and use a set screw to secure down into position, complete with a little thread lock too, before placing the other end of the linkage into the suspension arm and securing into position by inserting a 20mm cap head screw through the arm and the pivot ball, securing it in place. Repeat the same process on the opposite side, securing the sway bar into position. All that's left is to place on a flat surface, ensuring the sway bar is as centered as possible, and tighten down the two screws towards the center of the sway bar, holding it securely in place. And that's the first part of the front end assembly complete. Just like the rear, the front arms are completely free, no binding and no other issues at all. Next, we'll move on to the front CVAs and carriers, Bag H.